If you want to help MythVision podcast grow, you can join our Patreon. There are different tiers, as well as help out with PayPal. Thank you so much. Don't forget to like, subscribe, share, and comment. We are MythVision. Welcome to MythVision Podcast. Your host, Derreck Lambert. Got a head full of butchered hair under this hat. And I'm going to be interviewing another Derreck, which tells you it's going to be a great show, hands down. Derreck Bennett, who's been on the show before. We've talked about mystery schools. We've talked about, or better yet, mystery cults. The idea that a religious view or these type of movements exported into the region in which these people started to practice strange things that are foreign to Judaism. But anyway, he is an author and an author of the book Addictus. You can find that in the description, as well as a Patreon to help contribute to what he does. He puts blogs all the time on Facebook, but also is going to put them on his Patreon for you guys to see some stuff you're never going to see in Sunday school. You really have to scour and know where to find some of this material to find how he patterns mystery schools, mystery cults, Christianity, and sees syncretism, all sorts of amazing stuff. And with that being said, I think you're possessed by Satan, the devil, and Lucifer all at once today or something like that?
Yes. I am really feeling the Holy Spirit right about this moment. But it's all bad. It's all bad. It's like Arnold Schwarzenegger says in True Lies, but they were all bad. That was awful impersonation.
You did better than I could. I do the get to the chopper,
Turn this off now. I completely understand.
We
Don't
agree.
Stay with us. Stay with us. Lord.
What are you bringing? What do you've given me a hint. So what is going on, Derreck?
Well, so Halloween is fast approaching, and it's mid-September, but next month is October, and as you know, the entire month of October essentially is Halloween. It is, and if you try to dispute that, we're going to have a problem.
Yeah, we're looking up your IP address. We're going to hunt you down.
Right,
yeah.
Right. We're taking you down to Chinatown, and so yeah. So if you're like me and you enjoy the macabre, the dark stuff, because we atheists are equally Satanists and we eat babies, and that's a given. But yeah, that stuff is fun, and that's what makes Halloween so enjoyable and fun. So I figured we would dive into the origins of Satan, of hell, of demons, demonic possession, and exorcism. Because if there's one key takeaway from all of this, I want you to understand that this is a multitude of traditions that kind of coalesce, especially by the time we get to Christianity. But we've got multiple rivers, multiple tributaries flowing into this ocean, as it is with the entire Bible. So let's start off with Satan.
Sounds good to me.
Yeah, so Satan was, of course, the name Satan or Hasatan means adversary or accuser. And sometimes it's used generically in the Hebrew Bible. One can be a Satan, as in an obstructor or accuser. But there is also, of course, the divine, the definitive Satan, as we see in the Hebrew Bible, who evolves and progresses into something more when we get to later Judaism and the New Testament. But he's first introduced in Job, and here he's not the adversary of God, rather he is the adversary of man. He's sort of God's right-hand man doing his dirty work, so to speak. He's his divine prosecutor. He's sniffing out whether or not people are truly loyal to God Almighty. So when we first come across Satan in the book of Job, the sons of God approach God, and along with them came Satan, which more or less implies that he is one among the 70 sons of God, or the 70 sons of El, as it was in the old Canaanite pantheon, which still persists to some degree in the Old Testament, because let's face it, the Israelites were indigenously Canaanite. So Satan has been, he asks, where you been, Satan? I've been roaming throughout the earth and back and forth in it. This is very much akin to the ancient Egyptian Shammai, or wandering demons. So there's sort of a link or tie in there. And what Satan does is he metes out tests and punishments as God allows. So, and there are even verses where, Satan was at God's right hand, or at his right side. Again, he's part of the divine assembly. He's not the embodiment of evil. He is simply, as we've said, the accuser, the adversary of man, who does God's dirty work. It's not until the post-exilic period. So that's the period following, of course, the Israelites were taken into captivity by Babylon. That forms much of the backdrop of the Old Testament. All of the mourning and grief and bewailing of that period in history. But then later the Persians come busting in under King Cyrus, and the Jews are liberated, and they're allowed to go back to their homeland and rebuild the temple. And among the Persians was the religion of Zoroastrianism, which Cyrus himself was a Zoroastrian. And you can see in the writings that stem from from that period on, the impact of the Zoroastrian faith, a religion, on Judaism. And it's during that post-exilic period that Satan becomes equated with Ahriman, who was the evil anti-god in Persian Zoroastrianism. He was the opposer of the wise Lord Ahura Mazda, and he represented chaos and evil and had his own demons and so forth. There was this cosmic dualism between good and evil, the sons of light versus the sons of darkness. That's where a lot of this stuff comes into play, again, in later Judaism and in Christianity. So in the younger Avesta of Zoroastrianism, we see Ahriman tempts Zoroaster by promising him sovereignty over the whole world, very similar to the gospel narrative between Jesus and Satan. Ahriman was the creator of vermin, snakes, and scorpions. So we see in Luke chapter 10, verse 18, the use of snakes and scorpions by Satan. That's a telltale vestige of Zoroastrian influence and Ahriman. And of course, in the end, Zoroastrianism had a whole eschatology, that is, end times schema, which we see come into play, and of course, later Jewish texts in the Old Testament. And Ahriman will eventually be vanquished. He will be cast into the river of molten lava, where the righteous will pass through this molten lava unscathed, but the wicked will be burned. And Ahriman will go into the lake of fire, a river of molten metal, and there he'll be vanquished, much like Satan in the New Testament and Revelation. So very interesting sort of evolution of the character of Satan, how he begins and how he ends as a result of the sort of historic influences of the time and religious syncretism.
That is fascinating. I mean, it just shows you that using the Bible to interpret the Bible doesn't work out so well, number one. If you really want to know what some of this stuff means or where it comes from, you want to investigate outside. You want to look beyond. You don't just want to stick to your canon, but also showing evolution within the narrative. It kind of can, in a sense, put dates to some of these things. You kind of go, well, hold on. The older you go at something, Satan's pit bull of God, he's actually doing God's will, like in a good way. Later on, it's almost like he's fighting, on the bad guy's team. It's really strange. You kind of see implications with that in the divine council as well. It seems like all the sons of God were all good. They were part and parcel of the creation narrative. They were there and helped them create man in their own image and all that kind of stuff. And then what ends up happening, it seems like they got corrupted. And this is where I think we start rabbit trailing into later on traditions that become fallen angels and all that cool stuff. But I love this is interesting. I really do. And modern Satanism, I was talking to Dr. Price, isn't even what a lot of people think. They get all afraid when they hear it. They don't even realize most of these guys don't even believe in a Satan. And he says the ones that do and actually worship him as a god, he said they're just idiots. Like they're just idiots. So I think that's funny. Anyway, I'll shut up, man.
No, you're good. No, as I understand it, I've got a friend or two who is a Satanist, and as I understand it, it's really more of a humanist movement, than anything, because of the sort of anti-humanistic proclivities of Christianity, where you're taught to look down on yourself as a dirty, rotten sinner. Modern Satanism is trying to see us in a better light. So it's not about it's not about eating babies or sacrificing them or cooking them or anything inherently evil. Interesting bit about the fall of Satan. We see the first sort of snippet of that in Isaiah 14, where it's not about Satan, it's about the fall of the king of Babylon, which is made expressly clear in verse 14. I think it's Isaiah chapter 14, that is. But even that is framed by the astrological myth of Venus, or Hallel. Venus was the bright and morning star, the light bearer, Lucifer, if you will. But then the light bearer, Lucifer, is cast down whenever the sun rises. So Venus's, or Hallel's, attempt to usurp the throne of God Almighty, it doesn't work out, because the dominating, glorious, and powerful sun rises, and Venus is washed away. So that's where some of this astrological sort of personifying or allegorizing natural phenomenon comes into play. So that's another interesting little tidbit there. And it's not until even later works, such as those found in the life of Adam and Eve, that you have this fully fleshed out story of Satan's fall from grace and his being kicked out of heaven. So that's not really explicitly ever told in the Bible. Christians just kind of assume that it's there. Everyone tends to assume that it's there, but it's not.
Kind of like there's levels in hell. Everyone doesn't really, like Dante's Inferno didn't take I mean, that became as important as scripture to a lot of Christians. So today they talk about, well, in hell, there's a special place for you. And it's like, what do you, like, you start getting confused, and it's easy to get confused when you don't know Hades and Gehenna, and you see Tartarus and these terms that are Greek in nature, which aren't just places. They're the names of actual deities. They're gods. And so it's like, what the Hades is cast into the lake of fire? You mean a place is cast into another place, or is it a being? So you start getting into some strange, interesting concepts when you start digging into this stuff. And I, as a Christian, never for a moment thought Hades. I just thought hell, because Hades is hell. We're all like, okay, Hades is hell, and hell is a place, and it's a place where Satan and his pitchfork and his little demons rule, and they stab their little bad guys who didn't call upon the name of Jesus. You evil person, I can't believe you didn't believe in this loving God. He's so much love. And Just being stupid.
Yes, unconditional love means being burnt for eternity in a lake
I'm
of
just kidding.
fire.
Right.
Oh boy. But it's interesting you bring up Dante. There's this misconception that a lot of these ideas pertaining to hell originated with Dante, and that's not really so, because Dante himself seems to be pulling from a whole body of ancient literature and ideas that preceded even him. That's what I was going
Right.
to get into next. We're discussing hell. Um, Ancient Egypt. It's amazing how many of these ideas we see already in ancient Egyptian religion. Of course, you had judgment before the throne of Osiris and the tribunal of 42 judges. Your heart was weighed on a scale against the feather of Mot, or truth and right living. And if your heart was too heavy, too burdened with sin, it was cast into the jaws of this vile crocodile-headed creature, Ammit, and then your body was cast into this lake of fire.
Hmm.
Already we see the lake of fire in ancient Egyptian texts. There are even little pictograms of these fiery lakes
Wow.
long before Revelation was written. And another theological point of interest is the idea of the second death. Already you had this idea of being tossed into the lake of fire and suffering the second and final death.
Mm.
Again, we see this idea replayed in the book of Revelation. Thoth, the god Thoth, recorded, he was the scribal god who recorded the results of what went down with this weighing of the heart. So it's almost like an interesting parallel with the book of life, again, as seen in Revelation. The damned were hacked into pieces and tortured by fiery demons and ultimately annihilated. So they didn't suffer eternally, rather they were annihilated. Again, you see that link in the book of Revelation, where it's not so much about eternal torment, but about ultimately being annihilated once cast into the lake of fire. Um, the
That's
tale of
interesting.
the tale of Sea Osiris is an interesting precursor to the story of the rich man who's suffering in hell, and the poor man Lazarus, to whom he tries to appeal in that parable in Luke. We've already got in the tale of Sea Osiris among the Egyptians the idea of a rich man suffering while a poor man is rewarded for his good deeds. Um, it's amazing how much of the stuff you find already in these ancient Egyptian texts.
So
Uh,
let me ask you this in light of this, because
yeah.
we have some very intelligent people that we've communicated with that would disagree probably to some extent with this. Let's use, for example, he's a good friend of mine. He really is, Christopher Hansen,
Mhm.
and he is a skeptic. I'm so glad he is, because it challenges us to think harder, to really think, is this really the case? And one of the things I like about him is he tries to stick in the milieu and like focus on what it is, but I don't know if he would deny some of that. In fact, I think he might agree with us to some degree that, like, okay, I agree that like these concepts may have carried on, from older religious thoughts and such. I think where he has his issues when you start to uh, look at some of the more parallels type stuff, when you start to parallel like as if it has authentic genetic connections and things like that, where like I recently was reading in Dennis MacDonald's book on the Dionysian Gospel, he goes in this introduction explaining the Johannine tradition, all this stuff, right? And he goes, let me quote a few scholars for you. He quotes a few scholars and he says, but notice they stop short of saying this is literally constructed from the Dionysian, Euripides, the Bacchae, whatnot, from that narrative. And he goes, I'm going to show you by taking a step further that I think there's a genetic construction from the narrative. And the argument the scholars say is, well, this stuff floats in the air. Like it's almost like because it was in the air during this time, in this cultural context, everybody knew Dionysus did this. So it was easy to say in your mind, oh, Jesus, let's something similar like this, but not looking at the text. And he thinks that they're wrong. Of course, they stop short of going all the way and saying, guys, like, here's a literary connection. And Dr. Price would agree with you more. So what do you think? Do you think some of our skeptic friends would be reluctant to jump on board with what you're saying and suggesting here? Or do you think he probably would agree with you to that?
Um, you know, I try not to be too bold in the claims that I make. So, I'm not usually saying that, my goodness, the biblical authors must have sat down with the gospel of the pagans and just started plagiarizing this straight from the books.
Right.
But it is rather the more, I guess, sophisticated view that certain ideas were prevalent during that time. In some cases, there may be a direct literary borrowing or genealogical connection,
Mm-hmm.
but at the very least, there's an analogical one, that it's just kind of cut from the same cloth, from the same general thought world,
Right.
that this was all part of the mythic consciousness of the times. That's really, I think that's the least you can say.
Mm-hmm.
And I think you're out of your mind to doubt that. But I do think where a lot of these people have a problem is that if you're going to draw parallels, they had better be from the immediate Greco-Roman or Hellenistic world. And if you go beyond that, you're just straying too far. So, for instance, if you're going into parallels from ancient Egypt, well, that's a much more archaic, culture, the one where there's a much greater distance in time, at least. So that's just going a hair too far. I disagree because if you look at the historical context, for one, Egypt ruled Canaan during the New Kingdom period for half a freaking millennium, from the 16th to 11th centuries BC. That's 500 years. And we have archaeological artifacts in Palestine, in the Levant, of ancient Egyptian religious type. I don't know. I'm repeating myself. Religious artifacts.
Right. We have
Allow myself to introduce myself. But you
good.
have these ancient religious Egyptian artifacts in the Levant, in the Palestine, and some of them of Osiris himself.
Right.
So there can be no doubt that he was known there. In fact, in the Archaeological Study Bible from Zondervan, so these are not atheists with an axe to grind. They talk about the explicit parallels in Psalm 78 with an ancient Egyptian hymn to Osiris, where Osiris rules over the land, and his regent on earth is Horus, just as God ruled over Israel, and his earthly regent was David. Even they admit this stuff, although they put their own apologetic spin on it by saying, but here's why the Bible in particular is special and unique. But they're admitting that this parallel is there. That's
Right.
from Zondervan. Ancient Egyptian love poetry closely aligns itself with what you find in the Old Testament, including the Songs of Solomon. I mean, if something as mundane as that is found in there, then good grief, what else? And then, of course, there was, as a result of Hellenism, there was the inflow of Egyptian religious practices into the Greco-Roman world. You have to realize that Greeks and Romans looked to ancient Egypt with all the kind of awe and reverence that we today look to the Greco-Roman world. And those links have been established. And of course, that's why the cult of Isis and Osiris was so popular in the Greco-Roman world. We know that Plutarch speaks of them. Surely Firmicus Maternus in the 4th century is still witness to this cult. He never says that it is the cult of Osiris, but it sounds so much like the Osirian cult that there's almost no doubt that that's what he's talking about. Josephus mentions Osiris by name. I mean, there's no doubt that these guys knew about this stuff. And it was during the Ptolemaic reign, during the rule of the Ptolemies, that many Jews flowed into Alexandria. And of course, the Ptolemies ruled over Palestine even during some of that time. So even during the later Hellenistic age, you had these inroads, so to speak. And of course, there's the fact that Palestine itself was a popular trade route between Egypt and these other cultures to the north. So, you know, if you're going to talk about the historical setting and context, if I may speak plainly, there's a real ignorance in thinking that ancient Egypt would not have been pretty impactful.
Right. And so I kind of took you on the yellow brick road to show you the Wizard of Oz, but I think it's somewhat in this vein in terms of where Satan and a lot of different deities may come from, or how they evolved, and what demons are. I mean, where do demons come from? And I know we're probably not there because you were going to touch on hell, but you know, it makes me wonder, like, you know, I went to church, and we had a church that did the whole thing, you know, like we cast out demons. And what did we do when we went to lay our hands on people who needed demons cast out, or we thought we were going to cast out spirits and demons? We go, we rebuke you, Satan. What? Hold on. I thought I'm casting out a demon. Why am I rebuking Satan to cast out a demon? It's just a Christian. We hear it from another Christian who says it, who laid their hands on someone who's trying to cast out a demon. Demons, Satan. What's going on? Like, aren't they different? Isn't this a different, totally different arena? Why are you saying, Satan, I rebuke you, when you're talking to a demon? I don't know. Talk to me.
Well, yeah, it's as I mentioned, Satan, even in Job, he's depicted as wandering throughout the earth and back and forth through it. So that sounds a whole lot like the type of wandering demon concept in ancient Egypt. So in some sense, he's like a demon, but then the lines between angels and demons were kind of blurred back then. So why don't we let's skip ahead to demons. Let's skip ahead. We'll come back to hell. Skip ahead to demons.
Highway to hell, baby.
So demons were regarded as a source of plague and disease and mental illness in the ancient world, naturally, because we didn't yet have a scientific understanding of this stuff. So naturally, you were going to regard it as the work of evil, unknown forces. And one of the earliest, which I find fascinating, was the Mesopotamian Lamashtu. So Lamashtu was this lion-headed goddess who fed on the blood of infants. She was responsible for miscarriages and crib deaths. So the first lullabies, the original lullabies, were sung to quiet babies so that Lamashtu would not be made aware of their presence. Hush, little baby, don't say a word. That's what the first lullabies were all about. They didn't want Lamashtu to come and get you. And there's this interesting link between Yahweh and the destroyer in Exodus 12, where the destroyer comes in and all the homes that don't have the blood of the lamb painted on the door sneaks in and snatches the life from these firstborn children. There's an interesting sort of parallel there with Lamashtu. And then in Hosea 9, he's reaching out to Yahweh, to God, and saying, give them, Lord, what wilt thou give? Give them a miscarrying womb and dry breasts, talking about snuffing out the life of these children. And again, an interesting parallel with Lamashtu. And also when it comes to the abortion debate, oh my goodness. Pardon me for saying so, but hush, little Christian, don't say a word, for here we have God giving into the will of Hosea by causing women to miscarry and have dry breasts and slaying even the fruit of the womb of the children of Ephraim. Yikes.
Wow.
But of course it's okay when God does it,
Yeah,
because
yeah, yeah, yeah.
he has the right to. Yeah. So
Something
amulets.
interesting, real quick, and I want you to keep that in mind. Ambulance. Okay. Do you remember the movie Dragons or Dragon? It's a Bruce Lee movie. It's like I think his son acted in it. I'm not sure about that, but it takes you into kind of like his story and when he was born as a little kid, and his dad, and somewhere over there in Japan, I believe it is, might be in China, I can't remember, but they have these little lamp light type things they put at the windowsill, or maybe it's not lights, maybe they're these little, like, they almost look like trays you'd put your cup on, and they have symbols on them, and it's supposed to ward off demons from coming after your children. So they have something too. Like every culture seems to be having something as an explanation, a
Right. Right.
superstitious explanation for what happens.
It's almost like in one culture, you'll have something that has its counterpart in another culture. So there must have been this free flow and exchange of ideas. And granted, there are distinctions to be made between cultures. There's a whole lot of commonality as well. So, this argument about cultural context, not to say that that doesn't matter, but you're sticking your head in the historical sands, not understanding how truly pervasive a lot of these mythic motifs really were. So amulets and
Interesting.
talismans, yes, amulets and talismans were used to ward off these evil spirits and demons, and sometimes you would appeal to one spirit or demon in order to ward off another. So the ancient demon Pazuzu was used to ward off Lamashtu. And if you're wondering who Pazuzu is or what he looks like, look no further than The Exorcist. It's actually the image of Pazuzu that is used in that film. So that's he's one that's very much alive in sort of popular culture, so to speak.
Wow. That's crazy. You know what's crazy is I'm over here, I got my thing on mute, and I'm over here like saying something, then I unmute it, then I'm trying to mute it, and then
I just wanted that one to sink in, baby.
just hold on, let me turn around, and then my head, you know what I mean?
I just blew your MythVision mind.
Jeez.
We talked about among ancient Egyptians the Shammai, who are the wandering demons. They were responsible for possession, mental illness, death, and plague, and they punished humans by the will of the gods. Again, a very interesting parallel with Satan there. Sekhmet was another lion-headed goddess. Apparently, lions were associated with evil in some way, because she was a lion-headed goddess just like Lamashtu, and she struck Egypt with pestilence and plague with her 7 deadly arrows. So there's kind of an interesting link there with the deadly plagues of the Exodus and the 7 deadly plagues in Revelation. There's a great article on JSTOR about how when it came to the Exodus and the plagues that were afflicted upon the Egyptians, they were probably drawing upon the Egyptians' own religious themes and the goddess Sekhmet in order to make that portrayal. Again, the links with Egyptian religiosity are almost deniable if you really look deeply into this stuff. Among the Persian Zoroastrians who we spoke about earlier, there were the Devas. The Devas, perhaps the etymological origin of devils. I don't know that for a fact, but it does. I came across that somewhere, and it seems to have some plausibility. But the Devas were sent by Ahriman to oppose the angels of the wise Lord Ahura Mazda. They tormented souls in the afterlife in horrific ways. horrific ways, and they were oftentimes associated with specific sins, such as anger, sloth, envy, greed, lust. Again, we see these ideas well before Dante. He did not. He may have put his own creative spin on this stuff, but these ideas were alive and well, even well before him. Exorcisms were performed via purification rites and so on and so forth. And then in classical Greece, you had the Daemons. They were not inherently evil. Oftentimes, they were benevolent beings who were sometimes identified with the soul. So you could speak of one's daemon as their benevolent soul that continued to live on after their death. It was only later in the Hellenistic age, after the conquest of Alexander the Great, that daemons became divided into good spirits and evil spirits. And then, of course, what did Christianity do with daemons? They reserved the term daemon for only the evil spirits. Those were the daemons. In a monotheistic religion, you cannot have other divine beings among gods. So just as they streamlined the pantheon long ago, making Yahweh the only God and synonymous with El, you weren't going to bring in daemons and have some as divine beings, perhaps angels, of course, but this was primarily going to be evil spirits. That's how they chose to inherit and adopt that idea. You have Lucian of Samosata talked about those who free possessed men through exorcism. Celsus compares Jesus to sorcerers who drive out demons. Apollonius of Tyana performed exorcism and drove out demons. Now, clearly, Christian apologists are quick to point out that the story of Apollonius from Philostratus is from the 3rd century, so it post-dates Christianity. But the idea of exorcising demons and evil spirits goes back well before then. Even in an ancient Egyptian text, it talks about a priest who exorcises a demon from a woman via the god Khonsu. So this is a very ancient, archaic idea. It goes well back before Jesus or Apollonius. There's no need to say that Philostratus is necessarily swiping this stuff from Christianity. They both just stem from that same pool of ideas, the same kind of mythic archetypes that were prevalent from that day and age.
That makes sense. And the daemons that you're talking about, from what I understand, some of these scholars I'm reading right now, like Dr. Paula Fredrickson, who has Paul the Pagan's Apostle, and others in her vein, are saying Paul is fighting not only flesh and blood, but not flesh and blood, according to them. Now, this is their opinion. Of course, mythicists would go more on the spiritual side, but that he's fighting daemons. Like he's getting attacked by these other gods, these lowercase g gods, these other powerful beings. And according to this scholar, there was no authentic monotheism yet. Like it was more henotheistic, so to speak. There were other gods, but their God's the one true one, or at least most Judaism probably had this idea. She says that Paul is ensuring his Gentile audience, look, come to the true God, my God, because it's going to defeat all these other gods. You'll be protected. You don't have to worry. These other daemons, which they're arguing are other gods. So it's really interesting. It makes you think, so he's the God who's going to conquer and defeat all the other gods. Other daemons.
But technically, the correct term would be monolatry, because they reserved worship for one God, even though they recognized that there were other gods and divine beings, so to speak. But their devotion and loyalty was only to the one true God. Either they're phantoms, or if they do exist, they are subordinate and they are not up to par with God Almighty.
I hear you just fine.
Other gods before me.
Yes, that's true. That is true.
So we had spoken, we had touched on hell a little bit. I talked about the ancient Egyptian traditions, the lake of fire, the second death, all of which uh, most certainly ties in to the book of Revelation. And that, by the way, if you see these things persisting all the way into Revelation, then how can you say that the soteriology or salvation schema that was prevalent in the cult of Osiris could not have been influential in Christian theology of the New Testament? I mean, if these ideas are extending that far into the Christian canon, it's bogus to try and say that they could not have played a part in Christian salvation theology. The death and resurrection of Christ having eerie similarities to the implications of Osiris's death and resurrection, and how that spelled out um, or essentially conferred immortality upon his devotees, that they could die and rise that he had. Um, so yeah, so there's that. When it coming back to hell, the Persian Zoroastrians had Duzak, and this was a dark pit of foul stench. Wicked forces were forced to feed upon putrid things for 1,000 years as they awaited the resurrection. They ate their own excrement, the corpses, blood, and brains, their own children. They were forced to eat their own children. They were lacerated and decapitated, cooked in ovens and cauldrons. So you just had this whole slew of horrific ideas that are found again in Zoroastrianism, and well before you ever get to this kind of stuff in Dante. Um, the river of molten metal, which would annihilate the wicked but not the righteous. We talked about that, touched on that. Among the Greeks, you had, as you were talking about, Hades, which was just sort of this general underworld of the dead that was akin to like the Babylonian Orlu and the Hebrew Sheol, and of course in the Old Testament with Sheol, that was a destination of both the righteous and the wicked. Didn't matter what your deeds were, or what kind of life you lived, or what you believed. Everyone went to Sheol, as it's spelled out in Ecclesiastes chapter 9, verses 2 through 6. But then you had the sub-region within Hades, which was Tartarus. Tartarus was a place of punishment for unjust and impious souls, according to Plato, as he mentions in the Gorgias. Second Peter uses the term Tartarus as a destination of wicked angels, so no doubt they were aware of these ideas. And in Virgil's Aeneid, I never know how to pronounce that any better than you do, but in Virgil's Aeneid, the hero catches a glimpse of Tartarus, and he notes it's a swift river of red hot flames and a guardian in a blood wet dress. The way he describes that is so poignant. He hears groaning and lashing and dragging chains, and it's interesting when you talk about the fiery realm and the sort of rivers of flowing fire. Those who inhabited the region in southern Italy would have been witness to the active volcanoes in that region. So when they see this stuff spewing forth from underground, they must have imagined this is what the underworld is like. So that's where a lot of these ideas come from. Even Yahweh has the characteristics of a volcano god, precisely because the Shazu Yahweh, or those in that region, would have noticed these active volcanoes. And the way that Yahweh is described in the Exodus, the mountain quaking Other verses talking about the mountains melting like wax, the thunder and lightning that accompanied the billowing smoke. It's known as a dirty storm, where you have thunder and lightning accompanying the activity of a volcano. So you see
Mm.
those personifications of natural phenomena, even attached to the Old Testament God himself. Um, we talked about Sheol in the Old Testament. Hell is brought to the forefront, of course, in the New Testament, especially in the more Jewish-oriented works like Matthew and Revelation. Um, a lot of these ideas are tied to Gehenna, which was the valley of the sons of Hinnom, where children were supposedly sacrificially burned to the god Molech. That was at least the belief attached to Gehenna. What we know from archaeology is that more than likely it was just a dump, a place of refuse where the stuff just burned day and night. And that kind of became associated with these ideas about hell. So again, you just had this multitude of ideas and traditions kind of flowing together, precisely because there are similarities and analogies between them. In the apocalypses of Peter and in Paul, these apocryphal works, the punished, or people are punished according to their deeds. Again, like in Revelation. And that's an interesting little caveat there, in that so many Christians think that it's all about faith, that your deeds, it's not about works. But you have, of course, for Paul, that's the case, but you have other verses, including in Revelation, where it all does come down. You were judged according to your deeds. Again, it matters, depends on which New Testament author you're appealing to, which scripture and verse you're talking about, because they don't all agree, obviously. In the apocalypses of Peter and Paul, blasphemers are hanged by their tongue, adulterers are hung by their feet with their heads mired in the ground, murderers are thrown into a pit where creeping things torment them day and night. Creditors have to stand up to their knees in foul matter and blood. So you have all of these just very macabre ideas that you find, and even more so in the apocryphal works, which undoubtedly stem from earlier notions, like in ancient Egypt and ancient Persia.
I think this is an interesting topic that you're discussing. It just goes to show the imagination of humanity in general, uh, to warn the current state of affairs in this life of anyone from acting a certain way. It's like, here's a great control mechanism, but not only a control mechanism. Don't just, I know so many people go, oh, this is just a control mechanism. No, 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 no. This is also a way to psych someone out to believing they're going to get justification. Oh, well, he raped and killed my daughter, and I hope one day, well, don't worry. We have a place for him. Well, he'll be castrated twice a day for 6,000 years while eating from the carcasses of rotten, oh, that sounds like it's justification. Cool. He's going to be sucking one day. It's like, for the bad people who got away with bad in this life, they're coming up with a way to make sure they get what's coming to them. And for the good people who have bad happen to them in this life, don't worry. We got a good way where you're going to get good coming to you when you die. It's like, so there's more than one thing. I don't think it's just control, even though it's easily manipulated and used to control people. I do think there's some way of creating satisfaction to someone's mind who didn't get what they were hoping for, or watch these horrible people just skate through life like nothing happened, enjoying their life and destroying other people's. So it's kind of that, I think. Wouldn't you agree?
Absolutely. And it's interesting you bring that up, because, the idea of hell and, of course, of heaven was all sort of in response to the kind of injustice that pervaded the world then and still does today. In the book of Job, and you see other theodicies from that period that have very similar themes. Job is not the only theodicy that we find in the ancient world, which is a theodicy is it's a way of trying to distill the problem of evil and explain why injustice persists, especially in the face of an all-powerful and loving God. Job was an ancient theodicy, and there were others. And injustice was a big part of the problem. And what is God's answer to Job? My ways are higher than yours. You're simply not meant to understand. And he's never given a really fully fleshed, sufficient answer other than just, hey, it's just the way it is. And you don't question the big dog upstairs. In Job 41, God brags about being able to actually wrestle the dragon Leviathan.
Right.
Subdue him. Can you do that, Job? No, I can. So shut the up.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna say. Like his answer, it was, of course, who are you, oh man, to answer back to God? Paul
Right.
seems to have been convinced of this type of mentality for the injustices of the world.
Yeah.
And you're absolutely right. His answer is almost like whoever the author is trying to explain Job, I feel like in the times back then, it was almost like a sophisticated scientific explanation. Did you send the snowflakes from the north? Do you feed the eagles that cry for their babies? Like all these like things where you as a human who don't know scientifically how nature could, work the way we do today, are going to be dumbfounded. Like, yeah, God's simultaneously multitasking everything. This God's way beyond. Like, he tries to use a scientific kind of natural nature explanation to kind of like act like he's so beyond, so intelligent beyond, that he is blowing the mind of the person reading. And I bet it would work in the ancient world, but not, obviously not today.
Yeah, and what's interesting too is that God or Yahweh in the Bible, in the Old Testament, he fits the psychological profile of a despotic king. So that's kind of the voice that we're hearing. This is this is an authoritarian, despotic king who's saying, "Look, peasant, you don't get to question my ways. I rule, and that's all that matters, and it's final." Simple as that.
That's exactly right. Derek, my wife just walked in the door, and I've only got a few more minutes. So if you would take us out with whatever you have remaining and tell people how they can help support what you're doing. You're full of information. And I mean, if I have a question about something, I can always hit you up. And you have so much on this topic, especially like synchronistic ideas and like looking, it's really beautiful seeing how culture utilizes these same myth type themes that are based in nature, agricultural stuff, human, experience, all these types of things. And I love that about you. You're my brother, and I want others to be able to help and support you and to do whatever's necessary, especially with addiction too. We need to do a show on that and how being non-religious and yet staying off drugs work. But with that being said, is there anything you haven't touched on? And tell them how they can help you too.
I was just going to wrap, I guess, with the idea of Satan and hell and demons. As I had mentioned, this was a response to injustice in the world. And what's interesting is they seem to have found an answer, which was resurrection, or having an opportunity, perhaps not in this life, but in the next life. You will be rewarded or judged or condemned according to your deeds, so everyone would get theirs in the end. That was the answer to injustice in the world, in Christianity, as it was becoming in other religions as well. Even in the mystery religions, it talked about those who hadn't seen the light. Oh boy, no one knows what awaits them. So it's of course because of the kinds of trials and tribulations of the time that they came up with this idea that still captures the imagination to this day. We have
That's
nothing to fear of hell because, as is clear, we can trace Satan, demons, hell, whatever you want to talk about. All of this stuff we can trace its literary and mythic origins. And what's sad is this idea that persists in Christianity, that hell should be a place not just of sinners but of non-believers, which is talk about that there's no justice in that. How could you fault someone who's born in Iran for being Muslim, or someone in Tibet who is Buddhist? We are a product of our cultural environment. And, what kind of God could eternally consign anyone to eternal torture for simply not believing the right thing? That's not grace.
well said.
And fortunately, we have nothing to fear of hell. That's the good news. It's a myth, but one that still, as I said, captures the imagination to this day. If you want to support my work, of course, you can find me on social media, on Facebook, Derreck Bennett, Derreck, my own unique spelling, Bennett. But I will soon be posting a lot of this stuff to my Patreon, which I just got that started today, setting that up. So that would be, I think, one of the best ways in which you could support me and what I'm trying to do. And I'm a lot more eloquent in written form than I am verbally, but it's a much easier medium for me. But yeah, please do find me on Facebook, find me on Patreon, and I would love and welcome your support.
Thank you so much, brother. I really do appreciate it. Go help him out. Join the Patreon. Become a patron. And, we'll be seeing you back here on MythVision for sure. You just did an interview with my buddy Tim Mills, and on his show, Harmonic Atheist, which was really good. Your story is a very interesting one, which I really do learn a lot from you. When you write, like you said, your writing is very well done. It makes a lot of sense. It's dumb enough for me to understand and smart enough for me to learn something from it. But it makes really clear sense. And you always have a really pretty picture. I was actually going to contact you and say, where the hell are you paying for these images? Because they're so high quality. I look on Google and they always have like low quality images. So I was wondering where you're getting them from. But keep it up, man. I really do appreciate it. And we'll be touching on more on this topic. Probably do some collaborations in the future where you come on and we'll talk about some of these things, because there's so many names of gods and places and deities and things that are just, it's interesting to hear that other stories and other religions have this. That's what's made me personally see behind the curtain and see there's a magic trick for me, was knowing that it wasn't unique to this one religion, and that this stuff does outdate in prior and existed after the first century or the books of the Bible, which really blew me away and said, I had to ask questions from there. And I did. And questions started to come up with answers that led me into more questions, which made me just start becoming more of a skeptic, which is I think, a fair position to hold. And so anyone who's watching, if you ever get a channel up, like I said, we'll put that in the description. But for now, he's got the book Addictus and the Patreon, and get him on Facebook. I'll set those 3 links down in the description so you guys can join, add him as a friend, message him, whatever you like. Do you have an email?
Email is just my first and last name at hotmail.com. That's simple.
I'll put it in the description too.
Yeah.
And so with that being said, thanks, man.
Thank you. Pleasure as always.
Absolutely. And don't forget, we are MythVision.